Welcome to Party Zone Revisited. The who's who in dance music, then and now.
With me, James Hyman.
And with me, Simone Angel.
Good afternoon. Or good morning.
Hello,
or good
James.
evening. How you
Time
doing?
difference. Who cares? You are
Love it.
somewhere in the world. It's a certain time, and I welcome you, whatever time it is.
Thank you. I welcome you too. I welcome everyone who's watching this, listening to this, supporting this, subscribing to this, sharing this, because it is a look back at what we were doing at MTV, particularly the dance programs, Party Zone and Dance, which you presented and I produced. But you're doing a VJ special today with a Mr. Toby Amies, the charming, handsome man that he is and was and still is. A couple of memories that spring to mind with him is we went to the North Pole, a place called Spitsbergen, which apparently is the closest you can live towards the North Pole. It was in around 1996 and 1997. There was a group, an act, a solo guy. I don't know if you remember Biosphere. He was signed to Renat's Apollo label. It was an ambient offshoot of R&S. Apollo was very cool. I mean, really good stuff. Chill out music. Round about when the time may have been coined, the term coined. And Biosphere also, if you may remember, his music was used in a very cool Levi's advert directed by Michel Gondry called Drugstore. Grainy black and white. Kid goes to a pharmacy. He buys some condoms, and the sort of shop owner's like, okay. And then later on, he rings the bell, and he's come to see that guy's daughter. Really bonkers. And dig out, everyone. Go and get. There's a series of DVDs called the Directors DVDs of all their work, like Michel Gondry, Mark Romanak, Stefan Senwi. Can't remember all the other ones were. And they're brilliant. They're very cheap on Amazon secondhand. You can buy these things for like £2. Chris Cunningham did one. Anyway, I'm digressing. We've actually shot a Super 8 video there on all the glaciers again for a band called Terra Nova, based in Berlin, for Horst Weidenmüller's DJ Kick series. If you remember those DJ Kick CDs, they always had a bonus sort of exclusive track on them. I think this one was called Precipice, and it was basically, we had Mexican wrestling masks. Everyone had Mexican wrestling masks on. Again, the video is probably online. Certainly not like a Michel Gondry video. But anyway, the video is online, and everyone's running around with these masks. Great tune. And Toby and I had a laugh. I also remember a phone box that had an axe. And I was very into phone boxes back then because there was this great magazine called 2600, all about hacking and phones and you know, amazing things that you could play around with. And on the back of this magazine, 2600, it had payphones from around the world. So I think I sent them in the picture of the North Pole phone box. Why do you think it had an axe? Why do you think it had an axe by the payphone? Certainly wasn't to end your call. It was if a polar bear.
Ice, hacking through ice?
I thought it was if a polar bear.
No.
Like a polar bear comes up to you, you're like, whoosh.
So why was it?
I don't know. I think it was. I don't think it's like I'm going to end the call and you're going to cut the call. I think it was literally polar bears. Like if you're suddenly going to be pounced on, you've got an axe. Who knows? Anyway, you can email, text in, tweet in, whatever. Good memories of him. 120 Minutes Alternative Nation he was a presenter for. Remember all that? Do you remember anything else he presented? They're the ones for me. So he did the equivalent of what we were doing for indie music. What else did he do?
The thing that I just remember about Toby was that he was just always so effortlessly cool. I mean, some people try to be cool, and some people just emanated, and he was just it, you know? Like, do you know what I mean?
Even when he got hit once, I think it's a famous little clip which they used to trail, he got whacked by his very cool microphone, I think smack in the head. I think it cut him. He had that Johnny Depp style, didn't he? So even then he was cool.
There's a clip of that. Oh, if we can.
I think he also.
If we can.
Yeah. Like with he had that amazing microphone when he did a lot of presenting. He stood by. I'll tell you another thing I remember from it. It's all coming back to me. He did an amazing thing, kind of post MTV. He took a very powerful picture of 9/11. He was right there when 9/11 happened, and he took some fascinating picture, which I think the Guardian did a whole piece on it. Again, it will all be online.
And of course, these days, I mean, he's a film director.
Mm-hmm.
He's been getting a lot of praise for the latest movie that he's been doing, The Court of the Crimson King. Am I saying that right? He might have to correct me on that one. But yeah, he's a successful documentary maker. So it'd be interesting to talk to him about that.
I look forward to it as ever.
Toby Amies, thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Simone.
Oh, when James and I were talking about you, we're trying to bring up some memories, and the memory that he came up with was going to the North Pole with you. Do you remember that trip?
Svalbard, yep, to the northernmost inhabited point on the globe.
It's the beginning of a new and excitingly different story.
As you can probably tell from the snow on the mountains behind me, we've just entered the Arctic Circle. So, here we are on the northernmost point of the globe that a record company can afford to fly us. It's about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, but you can't actually tell here whether it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 1 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the evening, whatever. We're off on some kind of boat trip now.
It was, I think that was one of the times. Well, I mean, I have to say that there were loads of times when, even though I made the absolute most of the sort of sex, drugs, and rock and roll that we got at MTV, there were loads of times where you're like, I can't believe I'm allowed to do this, or getting away with it in some instances. And when we went to Svalbard, I was just like, this is absolutely brilliant. I mean, so we went to Tromsø, which is pretty far north, and then we went north and north and north and north, and then got stuck. So it was great.
Wow, cool. So when you think back of your MTV days, what are the moments that kind of stick out for you? Like whenever you're just, having a beer or sipping a glass of wine with someone and they ask you for some funny anecdotes, what are the things that usually come to mind first? Maybe not Svalbard, I don't know.
No, Svalbard was pretty good. I think the first, maybe the second week I was at MTV, I interviewed that band Eternal, and they were quite rude and not very nice, and I think I got a complaint because I'd asked them some relatively tough questions.
Yeah.
Because I was doing the news, and I think I remembered at the time I was like, "Oh God, am I in trouble?" And then thinking, "Well, no, I think it's good that you ask pop stars to be honest and real about what they're doing, because it matters. I mean, that's why I worked at MTV. I always wanted to work at MTV, is because music really matters to me. And it really matters to the people who watch the channel. And so it's, I mean, we had a fucking laugh, you and I, Simone, probably more than most of the video jobs. But I think that having that understanding that you are dealing with something that adults don't necessarily take seriously, but the people who watch, they, that music really mattered to them. So I think, that's my first beer burp. Not ever, I mean, on this podcast.
Right.
But so with regard to things that happened, I guess there were things that happened that were like deeply embarrassing to me. Like the Sex Pistols interview was like really, I just felt I didn't sleep the night before. I was fucking terrified. It was just as difficult as I thought it was going to be. And I was doing my best, but even when I watched that movie, I'm like, that's a fucking shambles, that interview. It's not a movie. But it's sort of...
But surely that wasn't down to you.
Well, I mean, all I can do is control what I can do, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't go through life thinking, oh God, if only somebody hadn't done that thing. I just go through life thinking, you fucking idiot, you know, why didn't you? You should have done that. That's my creative process, Simone, in a nutshell.
I know. It's very annoying. I try to switch that off. You know, whenever that comes into my head, I just go, ego, shut up. Because I know that's what it is. It's just constantly telling me I'm, you know, haven't done things right. And so I just try and shut that voice up. So I know what you mean. But surely interviewing...
I think it's useful, that voice. If I'm honest. I think it's like... Because I worked out a while ago that I can't really change my character at 50 fucking 5, you know. I'm pretty much who I am now. But I hope that I can change my behaviour a bit. And with regard to that voice, that's part of my character. That's who I am, is to grow up thinking that like everything I do is fucking rubbish or whatever. But so I just try and turn that onto the work now, not onto me. So I just think, how could this be better? You know, would you feel a bit better about yourself if you didn't think this film was so boring or whatever? Yes, you would. Therefore, why don't you use what you know about the process to make it less boring? And then you won't hate yourself so much tomorrow. So it's sort of, it's not ideal, and it probably sounds pretty crazy to say that, but I just think, well, why not use it to make the work better, and worry less about its impact on you?
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, basically, you figured out a way to make it work. I think all of us figure out a way to make it work. There was some comedian, I forgot his name, and he was calling it his inner bastard. And he said, no one can be as cruel to me as my own inner bastard. He said, no matter whatever I do, he said, I love it whilst I'm doing it. And then as soon as it's out there, I fall to bits and I hate it. And you know, any bad comment I take very personally. So I think anyone who's in the creative field kind of deals with that and deals with it in their own way. And it looks like you figured out a way to make it work.
Well, I think that like I am so much happier and saner and fatter now that I'm behind the camera.
Okay.
And that's because my work is no longer me, you know? So when I was, say, doing Alternative Nation, which is like, remains the best thing I've done in television. It's one of the best things I've ever done in my life. But I'm not bigging myself up there. I know people still say to me, oh, that show meant so much to me, you know, at a really difficult point in my life or whatever. And Catalina and Nick and I, who made that show, and Phil too, directed it, you know, what I think made that show good, and what also I think made Party Zone good, is that we knew who was watching it, and we were like viewers ourselves, so we could, you know, we had an understanding of what that show should be. Plus, like you guys, it was really important to us to be in contact with the audience directly. You know, and I think Party Zone and Alternative Nation, before the bosses got involved or whatever, we were already sending out emails and stuff in a sort of unofficial way to connect with the audience. And I think that made, you know, that early version of social media in terms of having sort of this, you know, talking to your audience and having your audience talk to you, really made a huge difference with regard to those shows. I've forgotten the original question, though, what we were talking about.
Oh, who cares about the original question? We'll come back to that. So it's just little stories of MTV. So let's actually go back. Let's really rewind it. I probably should have started with that.
That's what. No, hold on. What I was going to say is that even though Alternative Nation was good, at the time I realized that you can't like do a good show and walk off as the video jockey going, oh God, my hair looked particularly cool then, or the way I said that line that Nick wrote for me to say was particularly, funny or whatever. Because it's like, you can't remain sane and think that that is like a proper artwork or whatever. And so it was like, I'm not saying it wasn't important, and it was really important to me, but there was so much focus on the individual when you were a video jockey that I just don't think that's a very sane space to be. But when you can make work and have it outside of you,
right?
Then, and that's where I've sort of found I'm much more comfortable now, sort of having like, I may be a total wanker, and that's what my inner voice tells me. But at least I've made this thing, which is not me. It's just something I've made. It's something I've made for other people, a film or whatever that they like. And so I'm much more comfortable with that thing than just thinking, having too much emphasis on the person. I think that's why famous people go crazy.
No, but I mean...
And several did whilst we were working with them.
Right. No, but to me, Party Zone, and I guess Alternative Nation, like you said, we were also fans ourselves. We loved the music, and we were dedicated to the different music scenes that we were moving in. So you with the more indie stuff and me with the dance stuff. So to me, Party Zone, it was a team thing. It wasn't, okay, I was the one in front of the camera, but to me, it was about me and James working as a team.
Yeah, absolutely. That's my point.
And Chris, whoever. And so we were a team, and the dedication for me was really about the artist. Like, you won't believe the amount of times that James would call me up in the middle of the night, or I would call him. No, usually it was James calling me going, Simone, that's
I'm in prison. Can you get me out? I've done it again. I need $20,000 in bail money now. Can you help?
No, he'd be like, listen to track 3. And I'd be putting it on, and we'd literally be screaming at each other down the phone. And we have to get these people on, like bands that no one had ever heard of. And it was so exciting to get these acts or these DJs and producers and bands, and to give them the platform. So to me, that's what Party Zone was. It wasn't an ego thing. It wasn't about me. It was about the scene.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's my point. But the nature of the format in which we were working puts the emphasis on the person, and the people, not mentioning any names, who didn't even have a say in what the videos were, or, I was a producer on Alternative Nation who didn't have any kind of creative input, didn't even write their own words. The focus was just on them as individuals. And I think that's too much emphasis on someone, who might have started off being quite narcissistic in the first place, not mentioning any names.
It definitely is hard. I mean, dealing with fame, dealing with celebrity, being in the public eye.
Also, famous for what?
For being on TV.
I know, but
like all the time. We were.
When it started, here's a good anecdote for you, Simone.
Yeah, go on.
About the second or third week, I started at MTV, and I'd come from the States. I was at a Stereo Lab gig, right? Indie royalty. And I was in the crowd, and someone tapped me very aggressively on the shoulder. And I turned round, and it was just some like indie bloke. And he went, "You're that cunt from MTV." And I went, "Yes and no." And then he went, No, you're all right though. But that to me, that was quite healthy for me, having that in the back of my mind. But it was so British as well. And it was, I think you spoke to somebody, I think it was Rebecca, you were saying how weird it was that, like, when you were in the UK, nobody really knew who you were. But then you went to Europe and stuff, and you were that famous cunt from MTV. Yeah. I was, not you. You're not, but I was.
Well, you know what? I mean, that I really struggled with that. I had quite a few people like that who would, for instance, say to me, like, okay, people would meet me and they go, "Oh, you're actually okay in real life. I hate you when you're on TV, but you're all right in real life. And then you stand there and you go, I don't know if this is an insult or a compliment. I don't know what to do with this. Or people would go up to me and go, oh, I always turn you off. Whenever you come on TV, I turn it off. I'm like, okay. And then they end up following you. And you're like, well, why are you following me? You don't like me. Go away. So that was really quite hard. That you just don't know what to do with it. And it's obviously the ones who said they hated you the most who seem to be most obsessed.
Yeah, and I don't. Well, I mean, I do. Just as a rule of thumb, try to avoid the company of people who hate me. Apart from my family, I just have to sort of. I may have a lot of choice there, but with regard to like generally speaking, there's a lot of people in the world, so I try to sort of make that distinction. It's like, do you hate me? Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, I'm probably going to hang out with the people who quite like me, if that's for the time being. But I think that having met a lot of famous people now, and having met a lot of crazy famous people, I think that I don't think you can be sane and walk around spending a lot of time thinking about how other people think about you.
Right.
But if you're famous, people have an idea about who you are.
Yeah.
So the reality of somebody who knows who you are because they've seen you on the television is that they have that particular idea of you. That's their reality. Mm-hmm. Your reality is, as in my old roommate Bod, who I used to live with when I worked at MTV in Camden, used to say it was hilarious, like getting up, seeing me in the morning with like toothpaste down my front and like bearded and like, scrunchy faced and everything. And then he said like 3 hours later, he'd see me on the telly all like, made up and everything. He was like, I don't know who that fucking guy is.
Wow.
But so that's your reality, is you're the person that walked out of the house covered in toothpaste or whatever, with a hangover. But when you meet the person that's seen you on telly, they have that other idea of who you are. And so to have that experience be normal, you have to get inside their head to try and work out what they think of you based on what they've seen on you. And you can already see it. So I think it only really works if you build a persona that is sort of like you, but it's not really you.
Totally.
But I think like, I think why I like you on screen, and I'm trying to think of some of the other VJs that I liked on screen. Hold on, give me 10 minutes. No, I'm joking. I'm absolutely joking. I'm joking. But let's say Davina, for example,
right,
who I think has managed that whole thing of being absolutely who she is, but also being really great, really fucking great at being a presenter. I think she's fantastic. I've always thought she was fantastic as a presenter. But I think it's very hard to find a place where you can absolutely be yourself, but also cope with being famous at the same time. And I think to ask somebody to negotiate that when they're like 23 it's a lot to put on people.
Yeah,
it really is. I mean, I was 28 when I started, and I still don't know what the fuck I was doing.
Were you? You were 28?
Yeah, been around the block around. No spring chicken.
Wow. Huh. So, I think that's really the trick. I think you need to realize that the person that people see is part of who you are, but it's not the full, that's not all that you are. And I think a lot of young people, when they get into showbiz, and they kind of end up losing themselves because they're not anymore who they were before. They haven't quite grown into the new identity of themselves with that extra, element to their life. And quite often they seem to just latch on to the image of what other people have, and they end up believing that that's who they are themselves. And I think that's one of the reasons why they get so lost, because it isn't really who you are. Like you said, it's a little bit of who you are, but it's the very shiny bit. It's the polished bit. It's the bit that is always in a good mood, and and if you actually start believing that that's who you are, I think that's when people end up getting really messed up.
Yeah, and also if it happens to you when you're young and super malleable, if you don't know who you are at that point, you can very quickly become defined by what other people think you are.
Yeah.
And other people don't know you very well.
So tell me a little bit about your life before MTV, because I know nothing about your life before MTV. I never asked you about your life before MTV when we were there. So where should we start? Should we start all the way back at childhood?
Sure, if you want. I was born in Birmingham.
Were you?
Yeah. So if you would like me to, I can speak in the vernacular. So the home of heavy metal. It was great when I lived in America. People were like, hey, where are you from, man? I'd be like, Birmingham. They're like, what? Where? I was like, well, so Worcestershire, Birmingham. They'd be like, well, yeah, okay. So I was like, do you know heavy metal? And they'd be like, yeah. I'd be like, we invented that, so you can fuck off. So I'm from the West Midlands.
Yeah.
I grew up in Warwickshire initially. And then I grew up in I grew up in a large house, but it wasn't a posh house in terms of it didn't look super fancy, but it had it was sort of where I'm from in Worcestershire. It's the Vale of Evesham. It's the sort of the floodplain of the River Avon. So it's surrounded by, it's got the Cotswolds and the Malverns around it. So it's this very temperate climate there, so it's really good for growing fruit, apples and pears and plums especially. And so the house that I grew up in was the end of an orchard that had been sort of subdivided. So we had all of these apple and plum trees in the house, and chickens, and we had a field that was at the back of the house. My dad used to rent that to farmers, so we'd have cows or horses or stuff in it. And the nearest village was about 4 miles away, and that's a village called Inkborough, which for British people is the village that Ambridge, the home village of the Archers, the long-running rural radio show on Radio 4, is from. So,
wow.
And my first job was driving tractors, which I did at 14. Used to drive tractors on a pick-your-own farm. And my sister and I used to, for pocket money, we weren't given pocket money. We used to go into the orchard and pick apples, and then we would sit outside the house and sell apples and plums to passing cars. And we were hustlers. So I grew up.
I never expected that childhood from you. Yeah. That's amazing.
It was absolutely brilliant. It was very privileged, but not in terms of like, darling, here's some money, go and buy some stuff. It was privileged in terms of, I suppose, the access to things that we had, and above all, it was privileged in terms of the access that we had to, my sister and I had to ideas. Because my parents were both very clever. My mum was an English teacher and a drama teacher, and my dad worked in the printing industry, but he's a brilliant painter. Went to the local private school, which was the Worcester Cathedral School, called King's Worcester, which again, for English people, is where the great Rick Mayle went to Blackadder, went to school there for me, and also Chris Tarrant went there. Evil King John was buried in Worcester Cathedral because he was too naughty to be in Westminster Cathedral. So twice a week I used to, be singing hymns looking at the tomb of a dead king.
Wow.
And then, but that's also where I discovered music, I guess, was sort of, I was a day boy, I wasn't a boarder. So my sister and I used to get the bus into town, and unfortunately the bus station was very close to our house. So we were the first on the bus. But the interesting thing was that because we were first on the bus, we could get the back seat. So even though I was kind of nerdy at school, I used to have the cool seat on the bus, but just for reasons of geography. It also meant I had to get up at fucking 7:00 because the bus took about an hour to get to school because it went all around the villages. But that was quite good having the cool seat at the back, and it sort of was a blow for the nerds as well because the cool kids didn't get to come and sit with us because most of my friends were nerds. So if I wanted to see anybody, I used to have to cycle like 6 or 7 miles just to go and see anybody. So it was a sort of very rural upbringing. I used to like fantasize that, like, when I was about 14, that Boy George's limousine would break down outside our house. and he'd they'd have to come and ask to call the AA or something. And he'd see me and he'd be like, "Hey, you're pretty cool for like a 12-year-old or 13-year-old or whatever." That was my dream. Instead, it was mostly like, farmers looking at you funny because you looked funny. And then in Worcester on the weekends, you had to run a gauntlet. I used to, when I was a goth, well, I'm still a goth, but we used to have to we had school on Saturdays, which was so unfair. But you had to get from school, because school finished at like 1:00 or something. So you had to get from school in your uniform, which made you a target anyway. So you had to like work out a way of getting from your uniform into your goth uniform by the time that you got to the one cool goth pub in town. And so you'd be under threat for being, one of the posh kids or whatever in town. And then you'd be under threat. It was like, oh no, that's not good enough for me. I want to be under threat for decisions I've made.
It's funny though. I mean,
they made for me.
So the things I'm not surprised about the fact that your mum's an English teacher, because you've always had a way with words. To me, in my mind, I've always seen you as almost like a beatnik poet kind of person. Like you always seemed a little bit, just a way with words, and you always. It's funny because when I think back of our MTV days, you always struck me as too cool almost for MTV. You were like you had like the artist who was super cool, and then there was us, and we were on the outside. And to me, you were like one of them somehow. You had that rock and roll thing down somehow.
I think you. I mean, that's a very nice way of putting it, and it's very sweet of you to say that. Thank you. I think that I stopped presenting, or rather, I stopped wanting to present when I realized that when I was doing, because I used to do the big picture, and then from doing the big picture, I got hired by Film 4 to do something very similar for them, which is basically sort of covering film festivals, which on the surface of it sounds like a fucking great gig, because I was just like pouncing off to Sundance or Cannes or whatever, interviewing loads of movie stars. However, at that point, I guess I was in my mid-30s at that point, I realized that what I was doing was going, so what's it like doing the thing that I really want to do?
Right.
And when I realized that, I was like, oh. And that was the start of a very painful and much longer than I expected journey of about 10 years to actually get to the point where I was doing that. So I'm now getting rejected by Cannes and Sundance. So that's an achievement of some kind, I guess, right?
Well, definitely. So let's get to that in a little bit. Then let's just rewind again. So you're in the countryside, you're going to, the day boarding school. What happened after that? Because there's still a big gap between that and MTV. So how did the boy from the countryside end up in London? And
I was meant to go to Oxford University. That was the plan. My grandfather, who is Australian, Tasmanian, was a Rhodes Scholar, and Dad had been to Oxford as well. And so that was the plan, is I was going to, do the sort of classic English, road to power, I suppose. But I didn't really. I've always been a bit of a refusenick. Don't like being told what to do. So I decided I didn't want to do that. So instead, I was like, I think I want to go to art school. So in the UK, you have this thing called a foundation course, which is a really good idea. Which is before you go to do your official degree, you basically go to an art school and do a foundation course where you fuck about for a year and you try lots of different things. And I really did fuck about for a year. This was in Cheltenham, and I tried lots of things, but not much of what I tried was actually making any kind of art. I just had a laugh. I'd been at this relatively strict public school, and so I left, and I dyed my hair the day I left. I mean, I see like kids on Facebook or whatever, people, my friends posting pictures of their kids and their crazy hair and stuff, and I was like, there's no fucking way I could have got away with any of that shit at 14 or whatever. So, and I became a bit of a narcissist. Or I was just very into my looks at that point and stuff. And so I had this very long red hair. I was extremely skinny. And I suppose...
Very good looking. I remember I saw a picture of you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Like, you look like a model.
I did do a bit of modelling and stuff. And I got adopted at art school. I got adopted by the people we used to call the fashion bunnies, who were the people doing the fashion degree there. And because they were just the most fun. And they were really, really witty as well. And I got into, not really drag, but I did a fair bit of cross-dressing at the time, partly because, I really liked the attention. And also because it was very fashionable at the time, when Taboo was happening and Boy George and Marilyn was sort of at the peak of their fame, I guess. And also, to be frank, you saw more action if you wore makeup, if I'm honest.
Okay.
But I mean, it's not like I was walking around, pretending. I've always been in touch with my feminine side, but
you're an artist. They always are.
Well,
generally,
I'm interested in I suppose I'm interested in different ways of seeing the world, and part of that at that age is in you're also interested in different ways of presenting yourself to the world, I guess.
Right.
So I had a total laugh at art school, absolutely brilliant, but also my parents very wisely had gone, that's a great idea, but why didn't you apply to university at the same time and just defer your place? So, of course, I arrived at art school going, I'm just going to have a laugh. I don't need to get into better art school at the end of this. I've got a university waiting for me. So I went to Exeter University. I was a year above Tom York from Radiohead, and I think in the same year as Felix from Basement Jaxx. And because I was doing a course called American and Commonwealth Arts, which was a Marxist overview of colonial and post-colonial culture.
Wow.
How
odd.
Well, you might call it woke studies, at this point. It was really, to a 17-year-old, when I was making the application, it just said, go to America, go to university, spend a year in America, listen to records, watch movies, look at pictures, read a few books. So I was like, sounds fucking great.
Perfect.
But the actually really exciting thing, and this is where I guess, if you're looking for the origin story, it was that at Cheltenham, I think it was every Thursday, the manager of the student bar would give students 50 quid to sort of put on a bar party. And I did it with my friends Damien and Grant. And that's where I learned to DJ. Basically that one night, we learned to, and we had a fucking laugh. And so I arrived in Exeter as a DJ. having done it like twice at that point, I think. And I got adopted by some people who were running a night called the Shakedown, which I ended up DJing at, and that it was just, Simone, it was just the best. I mean, I get chills when I think about the music that was happening there. So there'd already been like Northern Soul. Mm-hmm. It was at the start of the Rare Groove revival. Then you had, we used to play some rockabilly tracks as well sometimes. Then you had go-go. You had early house, and early house is the best fucking house. You had second wave of hip hop, Daisy Chain stuff, Native Tongues and so on. Right. And then you had all of those fantastic sort of weird UK mashup records, plus the sort of early sort of hacienda type house that was coming down, and then disco. And we played a mix of all of those things. So it was great every other Wednesday night. And it's the thing about Exeter, it was just fuck all happening when we got there, because it was mostly posh twats, and whilst I might have had a slightly posh twatish background, I'd learned by that point that posh twats are fucking boring. So there was just a few of us, and we were like, "There's nothing going on here. So let's make things happen." There was a serious academic / DJ.
Oh, were you really?
No, they tried to kick me out 2 years running.
Okay.
I was late for my folklore final, half an hour late because I'd taken too many magic mushrooms the night before.
Oh my goodness! See, this is why you had to end up in rock and roll.
Then I moved to London at the end of it all with no plan whatsoever. I was like, I just hadn't thought about it. I was like, I don't know, maybe I want to work in the media. This is an example of my occasionally fantastic fortune. So I called my fairy godmother, who is a lady called Jacqueline Hamilton Smith. And she was somebody who's a little bit older than me, but she was my first sort of female friend. And we kind of grew up together. Her parents were friends of my parents. And she'd moved to London a couple of years before me. And I was like, I don't want to telesales, and I don't go. And she went, well, I'm just down the road from you, working at this place called the Power Station. Why don't you come and see me? So I was like, oh, I'm going to see you. And I literally walked down the road. She was literally at the end of the road.
Funny.
And she was working at the British version of MTV, which is this thing called the Power Station, because there used to be two different sort of cable companies, or they were satellite companies. And there was a sort of British version of MTV called the Power Station. And I walked in there and I was like, oh my God, I'm in heaven. Because music was absolutely my life at that point. It was how I constructed my identity. I was really snooty about it, And she introduced me to the boss, and I was quite pretty at the time, and so I got a job as a runner, and I don't think I've been happier. I absolutely loved it. And people would be like, do you mind awfully like making me a cup of tea? And I'd be like, I'm totally happy to make you a cup of tea. Do you mind awfully if I would, can you take my dog for a walk? I'd be like, fuck yeah, I'll take your dog for a walk, But I read every single music magazine. They had all the music press in there, from Music Week to Sounds or whatever. And all these free records coming in and so on. So I listened to all of the records. And I was just I made tea for the Manic Street Preachers, George with Suggs, all these great people. I swear I saw Davina's first audition tape, and she was great even then. And so I sort of tarted around there for about 4 months, 3-4 months or something, and then this new show came up, and I was like, do you think I could I audition for that? And I think people were like, it's not very cool for like a runner to be doing that. But they gave me a shot, and so I ended up presenting a thing called Sushi TV, a daily whirl in the pop culture blender, and I was fucking awful. It was like
Everyone is when
somebody
they
had
first
thrown in a
start.
plank into the middle of the studio and put some Paul Smith clothes on it. But so I did that for about 2 months, and I think I'd spent, as I'm sure a lot of people did when you and I were working, I'd spent a lot of time before when I was a runner watching the presenters and thinking, well, that's fucking easy. I could do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy, that, isn't it? That's all he's doing is fucking reading those words off the screen. It's a piece of piss, that is. And then you get to do it, and you're like, hello, I am here welcoming you to the show, and it's like the distance between what you should be doing and what you're actually doing was it's hilarious, but it was also some quite frightening. But Simone, the thing I want to say is that over and above that, like jealousy, and I could do that thing. When I was there were times when there were some presenters, and I'm not going to mention any names, but there's some presenters who just did not give a shit. And they'd just turn up, and they would get their script and they would say, they'd do it or whatever, and then they'd fuck off again, having made a grand or something.
Right.
And I hated them and I really did hate them because it goes back to the thing I was saying earlier, that music matters. And it matters to the people who are watching, and I think it just fucked me off that these people, weren't showing the respect either for the work, the art, or for the audience. Anyway, Power Station got shut down because Sky bought BSB and they only had room for one music channel. I came to see Brent, the head of MTV at the time, and nothing came of that. So I spent like this very, very shameful few months, basically being looked after by my girlfriend, who would give me a bit of money, and I would buy a packet of Silk Cut. I'd rent 2 horror videos, and I'd buy a can of baked beans, and I would smoke hash and just watch horror videos all day. And there was a point where I was like, this is pretty fucking shameful. Actually, I remember I was at Kinky Galinky. You know that?
Oh, wow. Cool club.
Oh, it's so much fun. And I sort of resurrected my sort of drag phase for that. And I remember somebody saying to me, so what do you do? And I was like, I think I was wearing it was either a Poochie dress or it would have been a gold sequin mini dress at the time. But I remember saying, I'm an unemployed television presenter. And as those words came out of my mouth, I was just like, that is fucking the saddest sentence you have ever said in your life. You fucking loser.
Oh, I'm sorry, but it's so funny. But you were. You actually.
No, that's actually what it was.
Wow. So when did you join MTV?
98.
98 you joined MTV?
It might have been 97, but I think it was 98, yeah.
That late?
Yeah.
Whoa.
All of these dates, by the way, could be totally wrong because I'm not good with numbers. Harry called up, woke me up, said there's this position for the news anchor at MTV. Are you interested? And I was like, fuck yeah.
In my mind, you were at MTV for many, many years, but you can't have been then.
Just because I was so old. When I arrived, you must have been like, how old is that man?
No, hold on. So I was 18 when I joined, but that was in 91. So, okay. Well, so it weren't that much.
No, but you were probably, even that stage, like 20 seconds makes a big difference when you're 24 or whatever.
Right. But how long were you at the station?
MTV?
How many years?
No idea.
No idea?
Really.
Seriously?
Well, I went to the States I went back to the States. I remember I think it was 1999 because I remember I got into trouble for the New Year's Eve.
You were there a lot longer than a year, Toby. That's ridiculous.
Okay,
You
well then
kind
maybe
of
97. So yeah, no, but it wasn't. I really wasn't there for that long.
Wow. But I guess you were there really at the height, though, because that was
What a
the
fucking
height of
laugh we had
MTV's
tonight.
popularity.
I mean,
Oh,
as
God.
I mean, I'm not of an apocalyptic. I don't like apocalyptic thinking. But things aren't going terribly well, it would seem, in the world at the moment. And when I look into the sort of the abyss that seems to be coming much closer to us right now, I do think at least we had so much fun in the 90s.
We did have a hell of a lot of fun. It was ridiculous.
We had golden tickets, and in a way, it like I remember saying to my girlfriend Bear at the time that like this is as close as you can get to being a rock star without actually being a rock star.
Yeah.
And in some ways, it was sort of better because you didn't have to hang out with the same fucking bunch of blokes all the time or whatever. There was so much more. There was a lot of freedom and a lot of access, and also you didn't have to be committed to doing the same thing over and over again, like a lot of musicians do.
And our job was pretty easy. I mean, once you got the hang of it, once you knew how to do the presenting, it was pretty easy. We would knock these shows out like bang, 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 bang. Like we'd go on location. I'm sure you must have done the same thing, where you're just like, quick, just film them all, just get them done, because then we were free to go and party. If I was in a band, I would be doing the rehearsal, the sound check, getting ready for. I mean, it'd be great, but it's harder. I think our job was definitely a lot easier. We just had to talk.
I don't know. I think didn't we establish early on in this conversation that I'm quite good at making my life difficult for myself? So I'm not saying I didn't have a laugh and didn't make the most of the sex and drugs and rock and roll, but I did also write most of my own material, if you can call it material.
Right.
I did produce a fair bit, and I used to like edit packages for news, and on occasion
Wow.
I would even do some research.
That's really good. I never did any of those things. I literally would just float in and go, which country are we going to? I had no idea what was going on, and I would do the research on the bands and stuff. Occasionally I would blag it, but generally, I made sure I was prepared and I was ready to go, but I never really did anything behind the camera. Oh, actually, I shot some B-roll. I did occasionally. James would give me a camera and I would do that. But apart from that, no, I just literally just rolled in and did my job. So I think I probably took the easy.
Oh, I don't know if it's easier or harder. I think the way you did it was very appropriate to that particular genre and so on. And like, the problem with the like indie world that I was sort of in is that it's full of people who think you're that cunt from MTV. So it's a lot more complicated, unnecessarily complicated, in my opinion. Yeah. And there's a lot more sort of like bullshit politics that you had to negotiate and so on. So. Yeah. So I had to sort of, and I just, it was just, there was a bit more behind the scenes work that needed to be done. Plus also, one of the reasons I moved to the States was that with Alternative Nation, in order to, once that show started to become successful, which is really once like rock stars started to watch it and talk about it, then people tried to get on that show in order to seem credible. And that created a lot of politics, plus to get bands that we wanted to play, we were told that there was a cost associated with that. So in order to get the sort of like really properly independent bands on the show, we had to get bigger bands to show and basically overcharge them. We used to charge them for having performances on the show. Well, this is what I was told. I never saw the accounts. And
I mean, I know labels would have to quite often pay for shoots. That's true. quite often, if we were like, okay, you want us to come, you're going to have to pay, which, yeah. But, and you're right about the indie bands. I remember at one point I was doing a show in Holland called Countdown, and I had to interview Talk on stage. And I remember asking questions, and literally they would just stand there and completely refuse to even answer anything. It's just like, you're right. A lot of these and like Blur, they always were really mean to me.
I got my revenge
a
on
lot of these. Yeah, you're right. A lot of those bands
well,
were harder to do.
I think that, like, to those people, particularly the people who didn't really watch the channel a lot, we were figureheads of some kind of corporate monstrosity. And so all too often, this happened a lot actually when I was doing the film stuff as well, that people would treat me as if I was MTV. And imagine it was the same with you and probably a lot of the other video jockeys. And sometimes I think it might have been appropriate, because sometimes these like serious artists would be dealing with somebody who hadn't done any research and had spent 3 hours worrying about their outfit and their hair, and knew fuck all about the person that they were talking to.
Right.
But then sometimes you and I would get that treatment because they'd made the assumption that we were like everybody else. And probably, so I can't speak for you, but maybe there were times I hadn't done much.
I think with my thing with Party Zone, and maybe you experienced this too, we had so many new acts coming onto the show who'd never done TV before. So one of my biggest challenges was to calm people's nerves. I mean, I think that was probably like the number one thing, to try and get them calm enough to be able to do an interview.
I remember when I went to work for MTV in the States, I was doing MTV Live, which is this travesty that then became the greater travesty of TRL. And I was talking to the stylist, and I was like, I cannot fucking believe that I am like, we're in the wardrobe room, and I was like, on the other side of that wall is Spinderella. And I've had the hots for Spinderella for like years. I can't believe it's fucking Spinderella. But, the only equivalent would have been like T-Boz, basically. But like it was Spinderella, and I was like, fucking hell. And the stylist said, well, ask her out. I was like, I can't ask Spinderella out. I'm only a fucking video jockey. But that also, like,
you?
That no, of course not. No, I was too nervous. I did all right afterwards. Don't worry. But like once I had an understanding that like I'd sort of moved up a few notches. No, it was like that said to me like I suddenly realized that like being a video jockey in the States was a very, very different thing to be a video jockey.
Yeah.
Because I would never consider myself to be on any kind of equivalence to like Spinderella at that point. Still don't.
America was quite different. I remember whenever we saw the American VJs, so we'd be doing an event and there's the European VJs and the American VJs. The American VJs would have this whole entourage of people, and there'd be about like 10 people sitting around the camera and doing stuff, and we'd be coming there and literally be me and James, or like we'd have 3 people, and we were just so much more down to earth, I think. Even though we were bigger than MTV America. So I don't know why they made all the hoo-ha. But Toby, I want to talk a little bit about your stuff after MTV.
I did go slightly nuts in the States. I shaved my head and stuff and just didn't want to be part of American MTV. But I remember meeting Tom Freston at it was the top of the pyramid at the time, at some not Hollywood, but like big showbiz party in New York. And he was like, "Oh, what are you up to?" And I was like, I remember saying to him, I was like, I'm finding my way as an artist. And it was absolutely true, but that process took about 15 fucking years. I started making films at that point as well. And we made a film called The End of the World Again, that won the Dali Award at the 1999 International Surrealist Film Festival. And that really made me sort of go, ooh, maybe I could do this.
Yeah.
and maybe this is what I really want to do. Yeah. So and also when I lived in the States, I'd started to take pictures because I knew that first year that I worked for MTV, time was moving so quickly. And I was experiencing so much, and I was understanding so little of it that it was like that I used the camera to sort of go, just hold on to that for a minute, and we'll go back and look at it later.
Wow.
And I made my living doing that for a bit.
There's one picture specifically that is really well known, I think, which was the 9/11 picture.
I used to live in this windowless shed in Brooklyn, and then I got the apartment next to it, and so I'd gone down into the shed, and I came out, and the light was absolutely beautiful. Like September light's really special, and I was like, "Fuck, that's good light." So I went back in, and I got this camera that my mum had given me, and her mum had given it to her, and her mum had swapped the camera or swapped some cigarettes for the camera during the Berlin airlift because my grandmother was an ambassador's wife in Berlin at the time, and my mum had said, "Well, this is a really good camera," and I went in to get it when I was like, "Oh, I could probably get a nice picture," and then I walked up the street. I saw a bunch of Puerto Ricans and a bunch of Hasidic Jews all staring down the street together, and you didn't see those two communities hanging out together. So I was like, what the fuck's going on? I took a picture of them, and then I went round the corner, and I was like, what are they looking at? I was like, fucking hell. And one of the towers was alight at that point. And so then I took two more pictures. And it's I've said this before in another interview, I think for The Guardian, but it's something really fucked up about being a photographer that your first reaction when you see something like that is to take a picture of it. You know, I mean, it's good journalism, but I'm not sure it's good humanity.
Right.
I remember looking through one of the reasons we got this apartment is because it had such a great view of downtown. And so I saw both towers crumble through our window. It was just fucking horrendous. I got contacted by a radio producer, and I went into Radio 4 and I started making some documentaries for them. And then I made a radio documentary about Draco, the star of my first film, The Man Whose Mind Exploded. That radio documentary was also called The Man Whose Mind Exploded. And people heard that and said, oh, that sounds like it would make a great film. And I was like, oh, yes, that does, doesn't it? Let's do that. Not having any idea what I was doing. And then I started filming it, got a little bit of money. That bought me a camera and some kit. Started visiting Draco to film with him. And then everybody kind of lost interest. Partly because I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. Partly because there wasn't really anything happening per se in the process of filming with Draco. There was no sort of end point, I guess. And then he died. And by the time he died, there was really only me on the film. And I'd become more of his carer than his sort of documentarian. And but that was the secret, Simone. That's what I made the film about. The thing is that like all of the good, like the really good, if they were good, MTV interviews, I think, were when it did get a bit difficult, you know, and you've got some drama there, and that's what's being recorded. And if somebody's being a tit to you, ass to you, then it's much more interesting to watch. And sometimes you just put yourself in that place and be like, this is really uncomfortable, but I know it's highly entertaining. And also, by letting this person be a dick to you, like that David Holmes story you were saying, that if actually they'd been recording that, that would tell the audience everything they needed to know about that person. And those are the things that are nice to make the films about.
Yeah. No, I have to say, not so much with artists being like horrible or anything, but just generally, I used to really thrive on chaos. So if we were somewhere at an event and the whole stage started to collapse and we didn't even know if the camera was on, there were no lights and there was no communication, I really loved that. Like the more chaotic it got and the more panicky everyone got, the more I got really calm and would go, ooh, I like this. I don't know why. Weird, isn't it?
I mean, that's when you say that, I was just like, yeah, that sounds like you.
I don't know why. I don't know why I like that.
When I was doing the travel programs, I forgot to mention I did a few of those, but people used to say, what's your ideal like journey or whatever, and I would say true adventure but without mortal danger. So that's what you want, is you want to be in an environment where institutions are sort of like the way things are normally done, that's falling apart, so you can experiment with new ways of doing things. But at the same time, you don't want anybody to get harmed in the process, ideally.
Yeah. I like that. I think that's it. I think you've hit the nail on the head. Hey, Toby, I think I'm going to have to start making an end to this. And I love, by the way, how your whole life seems to be a little bit like that first year that you did that kind of college, whatever. What was the thing you did where you just played around and just experimented?
Foundation course. That's very perceptive. Yeah, I agree.
That's kind of how your life has been. You've been experimenting with all these different art forms, and you think this is the one for you?
Well, I mean, I think it's. I guess it is. I don't know. I mean, I think it's like the older I get, the more I just want to be a part of everything, and I want my. I think I think you can be comfortable with your end if you don't matter to yourself so much, So the goal for me is to communicate with other people. And I think part of the problem with film, like I mean, I work with difficult people. That's kind of what I do. But interesting people who see the world differently to how I do, and I learn in that process. And hopefully, the audience of my work, gets that. But I really miss actually the contact I had with the audience when I worked at MTV. I loved that about Alternative Nation. It was like the knowing this sort of two-way thing that was going on with that. And that's a bit harder to get with films because they're sort of, by the time they get to an audience, they're sort of, they're like a year from when you've made them or whatever, right, as opposed to like yesterday.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I also I really like gardening. I make films about gardens anyway. That's my sort of day job. And I've also, have you seen my shell work? It's occupational therapy, and it's a sort of, it's very, very calming. And it's like doing a sort of improvisational jigsaw, it kind of, my big pretentious theory about art is that we already know inside of ourselves everything. We carry the universe within us, and it's the artist's job is just to draw those truths out of the other dimension into this one and make sense and shape of them.
Yeah. You're just a true artist in every sense of the word. I mean, yeah.
It's taken me for fucking ever to get here, though. I do wish I'd started a bit sooner, but I always think, I think wouldn't it be good if you'd actually stayed at art school, then gone to film school and actually made films? You might, be making proper films by now. But then I think it's think about what you were like when you were 24. And then somebody comes to you and says, do you want to, fly all over the world, meet famous people, go to parties, get drunk, have a laugh, get loads of free records, go to all these incredible gigs? Do you want to do that for 10 years? And who the fuck is going to say no to that?
Exactly. We were the lucky ones. Toby, it's so lovely to see you again.
Thanks very much for having me.
All right. Thank you, Toby. Thank you.
All right. Big kiss.